Hello, and welcome to the Student Ministry Conversations podcast with your hosts, Russell Martin and Brent Aiken. This podcast is all about equipping, encouraging, and inspiring youth pastors weekly with topics that are brought to the table by youth pastors from all over the world. And now, here's your host for this week, Brent Aiken. Hey guys, welcome back to the Student Ministry Conversations podcast. I am one of your hosts, Brent Aiken, and today we have a special guest. We have the opportunity to sit down with Dan Carson. And so Dan, got to know him recently when I had the opportunity to come on his podcast, but I don't want to ruin Dan's thunder. Dan, tell us about yourself. Tell us what you do. Obviously, tell us about Student Ministry Matters. And anything else you want to throw in there, family, all the good stuff.
Sure. Well, Brent, it's great to be on your podcast. I've been listening to you guys for a while. I've enjoyed hearing you and Russell kind of alternate back and forth and hearing all about the different things you're involved with, because what I find is that, well, guess what? We're all in the same boat, trying to serve and love students. And so, my name's Dan Carson. I've been in ministry for now over 30 years. Recently, I had a chance to go to the Student Pastor Summit up at Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, and I got a book for free because I was the oldest. That's what it boils down to. At 50 years old, I know that I'm kind of like a dinosaur in student ministry circles, but that's okay. I've seen a lot of different things over the years. Currently, I serve as the family pastor at Calvary Baptist Church in Fayetteville, Arkansas. But I'm also the director for the, wait for it, it's long, the Baptist Missionary Association of Arkansas Youth Department, or as we like to call it, Student Ministry Matters. We've started a podcast. We do a similar type of thing that, Brent, that you and Russell do. We talk with people. We have them share different things that they know, and we get a lot of information because we want to invest in those that are seeking to impact the next generation for Jesus. And over the years, I've had the chance to learn a lot through experience. I've served in, just a bunch of different roles over the years. I've been a youth pastor, worship pastor, associate pastor, church growth pastor at one place. I was the lead pastor at a mission church for a time, but just like what happens, we always end up working with students because we love them. It's a part of our DNA as youth guys. But I had a chance to go to Central Baptist College in Conway, where I got my bachelor's degree. Then I went to the BMA Theological Seminary in Jacksonville, Texas. And currently, I'm trying to finish up my doctor of ministry at Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Kansas City. I've been married for 29 years. My wife's name is Temple. Yes, that is Temple, like the church. And so her name is Temple. She's a family and marriage therapist up in Rogers, Arkansas. She just does some incredible work. Super proud of her. We have 2 adult children. I have 1 daughter-in-law, and we have 2 crazy dogs. And that's pretty much my life. A lot of crazy things going on. So.
Awesome. Well, I love how you brought up that through the years of all the different things you've done, whether it be the podcast or whether it be all the different positions on church staffs that you've done, all the different conferences, everything else. It really ties into our conversation today because the topic that you chose for today was what it means or what it is to be a lifelong learner. And I obviously, with us running this podcast, I can totally agree with you. I end up getting far more out of this podcast than I think others get out of it, because just getting the opportunity to sit in on these conversations, I'm always getting off of podcasts and then looking over at my associate youth pastor and being like, we need to think about this. We need to try this. We need to and so there's always these new ideas. There's always these new things that come about. And the thing is I believe it's important, and we'll get into that in a little bit, but before we get too far, what does it mean to be a lifelong learner?
Well, one of the great things about ministry is our job really is to be learning all the time. We're trying to dig into God's word so we can share it with people. We're trying to learn new things so we can reach out and impact people's lives for the cause of Christ. The idea of a lifelong learner is, well, it's a couple of different things, but primarily to me, it's an indicator of humility. Of course, we're going to be spending all those years learning and taking every advantage of it, but it is a sign of humility. It's a realization that there's always someone out there that can teach you something and that you have more to learn. You mentioned it yourself as the host of this podcast. You get the opportunity to talk with a bunch of different people, different settings, and you're learning some things along the way. And one of the things that our listeners here today probably don't know is that before a podcast begins, after a podcast is over, you get to hear those things maybe 2 or 3 times. You get to talk about them in more detail before the podcast begins. It's just a great way to keep learning in that process. But a lifelong learner is just someone who cares very deeply about growing and continuing to grow. There's a phrase that goes that leaders are readers, and I completely agree. And whether it's about student ministry, Christian living, about theology, our calling as leaders in Christian community, whether it's students or whether it's with the church body as a whole, they demand that we invest in growing our understanding of God's word and a ministry. We can't just put it in a neutral and coast down the hill once we've reached a certain peak. I'm 50, so I've learned a lot over the years, but I'm going to keep going to conferences. I'm going to keep learning in the process so that maybe there's something. And I don't get stuck on those ideas that someone is 25, so I can't learn anything from them. I'm old enough to be their dad, that they're going to come and they're going to share something in a new and insightful way. It's like your students. You take your students to a conference, they go and they hear the exact same thing that you tell them from your pulpit or from your stage, your platform on a Wednesday night. You're telling them, hey, follow Jesus, and here's why. And they're like, just deadpan. But they go to this conference and they hear some speakers say the exact same thing. And then they come to you. Did you know that we're supposed to do that? Yes, I've been telling you this for years. And so it's the same way in learning and growing in our understanding of ministry. It's just a matter of I got to keep growing in that process. I can't just put it in neutral and coast down a hill. I want to be useful and finish well. And I think I've still got like 25, 30 more years of ministry in me, but I want to finish well in that process. And to do that, I've just got to keep learning.
Yeah, I definitely think you have at least another 25 years. But I love how you said that learning is one of the biggest parts of humility. I love the aspect of that, just for the sake of I think this is told throughout different occupations and everything, but if you think that you're the smartest person in the room, you immediately become the dumbest. And it's just one of those things. It's like, it's not necessarily like when we don't approach this from a humble perspective and we don't approach this from a place of humility, like you said, the dangers of it are apparent because pride comes in pretty strong. When you think that you're the biggest and the best and the brightest, well, there's really not much room for anybody else. And so I love that. Love the opportunity, just to even have listeners here that, like, if you want to do that, you have to start with humility. Such a good point. So obviously, with that being said, humility is important. But I would say that another question that people might have would be, well, yeah, sure. I want to learn more. And obviously, like, everybody has like the illustrious library of all the different books that you've read, about 10 of them, and there's about 70 on your shelf. But the thing is what are some ways that people could continue developing their skills and learning in the long run that they might have not considered about? So this would just be like a shotgun spread of like as many opportunities that you can think of as far as like getting yourself out there and allowing yourself to be that learner. You've mentioned conferences. That's a great one to start with.
Yeah, conferences are one of the best ways. And usually they're not that expensive. I mean, when it comes down to it. And you may not take home everything you learn at a conference and apply it. You may only find one or two things. But what I find when I go to conferences are this great sense of encouragement. That was for me. I went to the For the Church conference up at Midwestern just recently. It followed the Student Pastor Summit, and the worship was just so uplifting and encouraging. I've got men there teaching me the word. I'm understanding things better. And it was very meaningful to me. And it goes beyond that. We will learn some things. We will be able to take some things back with us and apply them. So conferences can work, and they can work for any level. I say any level of us, but I'm sure your listeners are like ours. You got full-time guys, people who work full-time vocationally. Then you've got others who are part-time. Maybe they're working at a business, and then on the weekends they're loving on students. And then you've got some that are just simply volunteers. Well, the best part about a conference is if you can get away, it usually caters to that wide range of people. And so it's pretty big. Now, some of the other things that I wrote down when we were talking about this and thinking about it was mentoring relationships. Find somebody out there who is further down the road, and that you say, hey, I would love the opportunity, maybe just to talk to you about this situation, what's going on. Maybe you could do this on a weekly or a monthly basis. And so find that mentoring relationship. There are, of course, ministry coaches, and that's a little bit different. A coaching relationship is different, but a mentoring one is just, you've got somebody who's been further down the road, and you need to bounce things off and learn things from them. So that's a good way. Reading, of course, you mentioned it. We all end up, those of us in ministry, end up with bookshelves full of books. Maybe we've gone to a conference and we saw, hey, that book looks good, I'll take it home with me. Or this other conference gives me 5 books, like the one I just went to. How am I going to have time to read those? Well, that's where getting involved in an online group and asking some questions. What do you think of this book? How does this help me? Should this be something I spend my time on? Because we all have limited amount of time. I've got 2 adult children and a daughter-in-law, but you know what? They were teenagers in my youth group not that long ago. And so I didn't have time. They were in band. I was busy running around doing student ministry and being a dad. So I want to spend time and read. Now, reading can also take the form of blogs. You find a good blog and you find some great information there. I believe that you guys have a blog as well, don't you?
Yeah, it is. It is a blog.
A blog.
But we do not have near as much as I'd like for it to be on there. But yeah, we do have a few different posts, some that I've written, some that Russell's written, and then we've even had a few guests submit articles that kind of correspond with what their episode was about for the podcast.
Okay. Well, again, blogs are a great way if you find the right people. And usually some of the bigger student ministry, youth ministry sites will have blogs, and you can get some information off of there. But just being intentional about that, going back to them. Now, one of my favorite things is podcasts, mainly because I may not have time to sit down and read a book or have time to read a lengthy article, but I've always got to take my dogs for a walk. I have to be out on the road at different times, and I can't read there, but I can spend some time listening to your podcast or listening to, let's see, it was the Student Ministry Connections podcast with Steve Colum, Student Ministry Conversations. And there are a lot of other ones. I know Doug Fields and Josh Griffin have one. Then you could always listen to our Student Ministry Matters. But there are podcasts, and you can find a voice that you like to listen to and that fits with your theological bent. I know that there are things that we differ on. That's just the nature of this. But so you can find a podcast out there. Then there are some other things that you can do. Two that are big ones. One, you can go back to school. I know that's not easy, but as things have happened in our world, as the pandemic came through and forced schools to look at online education, now you're able to get an online degree in ways that you could never do that before. And so maybe you are working online towards a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, but just deepening that understanding of God's word in a ministry. Some of those things can be face-to-face, like this Zoom call that we're on right now, or it can be just simple work by yourself and then interact on a group board and talk about those things. I love the doctoral work that I'm in right now because I study for like 9-10 weeks, go on campus for a week, interact with people, and then I have to finish up my class. I like that face-to-face. So if you live close to a college where you can finish up a degree or work on a new one, take advantage of that. Now, the other thing is just conversations with older saints. And what I mean there are just the people in your church. They can help you in the learning process. Wednesday nights before the pandemic, I would go into our fellowship hall, and all of our old people would sit around. And I'm getting closer there every day myself, but they would be sitting around drinking coffee and just shooting the breeze, that type of thing. And I would go in, all right, give me some of your wisdom. And they always just kind of chuckle and laugh, but I would love to sit there and maybe go to my Christian seniors luncheon monthly. And I would always learn something about a wide range of things. One time I remember learning about farming. I'm not a country guy. That's just not me. I'm not a farmer, never had that experience, but I was learning different things about gardening, about the olden days, we'll call it that. And it was exciting to learn through that. But that's just like you said, a shotgun look at some different things that you can learn as you go along.
Yeah, when I echo pretty much all that you said, as far as finding your finding your favorite opportunity. There's tons of different resources out there. There's tons of different opportunities to learn more. I will say that podcasting is also one of mine. Listening to Carrie Newhoff or listening to some of the different student ministry student ministry podcasts that are out there. I listened to a few, had most of them on our show as guests so far that I listened to. But then also just the opportunity to get out there and listen to as much knowledge and as much information from different people, like you said, because if you go to the same watering hole every single time for information, eventually you're going to run out, because they are going to get to where there's really not much more that can be said. But if you have multiple opportunities from multiple resources, you can really dive into that. And going back to school and getting your bachelor's and master's. I did my master's degree in the spring of 2014 to 2015, and did it all online. Went to Liberty University, and literally never left my town in Texas, and it was great. Went and got my master's of arts in Christian ministries, did a specialization in discipleship and church ministry. And I will definitely say that there are some things that I've taken from that and I've run with, and they are kind of ingrained in how I do everything now. And so finding those opportunities is super, super important. So other than just finding opportunities to learn, though, obviously there are some, for lack of a better word, obvious benefits of continuing your education, or just continuing to learn in general. But what are the benefits of continuing your learning or continuing your education beyond the point of just passing I have enough information or I have enough knowledge to do this? Because I think sometimes, a lot of times, when we, especially with younger youth pastors, especially, you see a current trend of like, well, I know enough. I've read my Bible. I know what the Bible says, and I'm just going to go teach the Bible. And it's like, well, yes, that is true. And that's what we're called to do. But like, we're supposed to do it, but that doesn't mean that we stop there. Like, that we have so much more opportunity for learning on, how to present the Bible different, and how to present the Bible in more approachable ways, how to encourage students to be leaders, how to equip them to be prayer warriors, how to equip them for stepping out in their school and faith, and all kinds of stuff. And all of these things, you can't really just stop, because like you said, you've been in it for 30 years. You can't use the same techniques and practices that you used 30 years ago, because the game's changed.
It has.
It's a completely different world. So what's the benefit of continuing past what's just needed to get by? And what is the drive to, I guess, continue, other than, I guess, the obvious?
Well, before I answer that question, I just want to highlight something you said. The game has changed. It definitely has. Ministry has changed dramatically. I'm Gen X. There's been millennials, and now we're at Gen Z, and we're closing in on alpha coming up. I mean, that's
Yeah, Gen A, something like
yeah,
that.
yeah, something like that. And so those things change. Word of God, unchanging. It's eternal, it's everlasting, it is perfect. However, ministry changes. So we have to keep learning. Now, I think I've got, I think, three things that'll work in to answer your question. Number one, and may sound almost cheesy, but the fact is we feel better about ourselves when we know more. When we have taken time to grow personally, we're going to feel better about ourselves and not feel like we're constantly behind. So that's important. It's important for us to feel good about ourselves. Now, the other thing is that it may give us that some opportunities that we're not even aware of. As we look down the road and we think, well, I'm always going to be a youth pastor, or I'm always going to be at this church in this place at this time. And if we get stuck in that mentality, we'll never learn anything else, because we'll figure out what works there and we'll just rinse and repeat. Because all you have to do is have 7 good years of curriculum, or 6 or 7 in that range, and then you're fine, because you're going to rotate new kids through. You can have your little dog and pony shows, as to speak, and then they could just rinse and repeat, and you could serve a whole lifetime like that. But the truth is that we need to keep learning, we need to keep growing, because you don't know what God has down the road for you. And then I think really what you talked about, things change in life, things are going to change. We need to have an understanding of the culture, we need to have an understanding of new ministry opportunities. We need to be very sure of what we believe. And that means that we need to keep learning and keep growing in our understanding of God's word. It gives us credibility with our parents. As we get older, and our parents, of our students, they're there. They need to see that we are taking this serious. This isn't just something we show up with a little notebook, some things scratched in it, maybe a doodle or two, and say, okay, let's do this. That you're taking time to be professional. Now, we don't want professional ministers. That's something different. But we do want to be professional as we approach this. And that means that we're going to take time to learn. I think about my wife. She is a counselor, she's a therapist. She has to have so many continuing education hours for her to hold her license and for her to keep going. There's not the same thing out there for pastors. Nobody's saying, hey, you got to make sure that you do this many continuing education hours. But teachers, they have professional development days. Doctors do the same sort of thing. They have to keep learning in the process. They read journals, and the professions go on of things that they have to keep learning. And so, hey, we need to do the same. There are going to be people who look to us, and we need to be able to say to them, yeah, I've read about that. I understand that. We don't have to spend our entire lives with our head in books, but I know that there are many guys in student ministry that the book is the last thing they want to look at. So listen to a podcast, look at a quick blog, just stay in touch with what's happening next.
Well, and I would also say that you not only need to do that, but you need to pay attention to the culture around you too.
Yeah.
A big part of your learning curve and your learning process needs to be the culture as well. And you can look at resources from Barna, Fuller Youth Institute, and both of those do some fantastic work when it comes to understanding the culture that these kids are coming from and growing up in. Because the thing is especially when you're trying to reach the students that haven't been reached yet, you have to know the culture that they come from, because that's going to be your greatest step into getting that relationship built to where you can start bringing the gospel to them. And they do some tremendous work. Both of them, I've used all their stuff. Barna, the state of youth ministry, that they put out every year, and just all the different current trends and everything going on with the culture. And I understand that there's some, I mean, I live in middle of nowhere, small town, Texas. I say small town, but middle-ish small town. And some of the cultural things that they write don't necessarily appeal to us, but I still want to learn them. I
Right.
still want to be
Right.
on top of that, because if it ever does come, then I want to be prepared and be ready, kind of like you said. It just allows us to be more, um allows us to have a better feel and better attitude for engaging whatever comes. I mean, if you don't have to come to a situation and be like, "Oh no, I don't know how to handle this," you typically feel a lot better off. You might not know 100% how to handle it, but if you've read or done any study on that situation, it does ultimately help how you process and handle it too. So, I did see one thing that you go ahead. You looked like you were going to say something.
Yeah, we're talking about culture and continuing to learn in that. Just to give you an idea, this has always been a part of my DNA as a youth pastor. Back in the day, okay, here we go, the old man rant. But back in the day, MTV actually stood for music television and VH1. And so there was a period where I was actually watching MTV at least enough so that I would know what my students were being exposed to musically. There are a lot of ways that you can do that now. Now you have to keep up with so much between social media, culture of what they're ingesting or consuming in the way of music and movies and everything else. There is an organization, I believe they're called Axis, AXIS.org, and they offer a culture translator email. And so you can sign up for that, and they will send you a weekly email that you can read and understand different things that are happening in the culture and describe those. They have podcasts as well, but it's just a way for you to stay ahead because, again, it changes so quickly. I mean, when I was a kid, there was, here we go again, old man rant. There was no internet. There was cell phones weren't really a thing. It wasn't until college that those started becoming a reality. And now a student walks around with a phone in their pocket that has more processing power than anything I could ever dream of. I mean, they have a camera, they have a video camera, they have a personal computer, they have access to the internet. All of these things have changed so much. And so we need to figure out ways to keep learning and in that process.
And not only that, but you also have to work towards safeguarding them
Yes,
from the potential dangers of all this access and all this information as
that's
well.
right.
And that's the thing, is information has always been there. It's just 10 times or let's be honest, 1,000 times easier
There
to
you go.
access it now, because it's so readily available. Like you said, they have Google at the palm of their hand. I mean, they can literally ask anything. My kids, we have Alexas all over our house. And so I, without fail, at least twice a day, my youngest, which is 6, is at one of the Alexas asking just random questions like, Alexa, how do robots charge? Like, I mean, all kinds of stuff. And it's just like, it'll, it'll just jump into a search engine and
Yeah,
it'll do its
it
best
will.
to explain. And so while some of that's great, and I don't really care if my son learns about robots and how they charge and all that stuff, there's a lot of danger on there too.
There is. There is.
And so we have to, access is a great resource. And it's also a great resource if you have any kind of parent newsletter. Go ahead and throw access in there,
Yeah.
because it is a great resource for parents just as much as it is us, because in the grand scheme of things, we don't see students near as much as their parents do. And so we need to be equipping them, for um, helping them parent their teenager or parent their student at home as well, because we only get to see them for a couple hundred to a couple thousand hours forever, and then they move on and they're done. But the parents are there as a primary influence and primary discipler for their entire life. And part of our job needs to be using our learning and using our resources to equip parents, so they can better be prepared to handle their teenagers and move forward.
Yeah.
So let's see. I had a thought, and then we got on Access, and I was like, "Oh, that's really good. I'm glad you brought up Access." So we were talking about um, the benefits. And you said something and now I'm blanking. But I'm sure if it was important, it'll come back to me. But continuing on that benefits for just a second, obviously there's a lot of big benefits. The last one, and I wouldn't say that this is a big, I wouldn't consider this as one of the biggest by any means, but I think it's also super important that if you are in a smaller church and you want to work at larger churches, most of those churches require you to have some sort of degree in some sort of ministry study.
That's true.
And if they don't require you to have it, it does make you a better candidate in the long run because you are more experienced, you have more education. And so just having that as another benefit of going in and continuing learning, it doesn't necessarily mean go back to college, but you need to be able to say, hey, look, I've been here, I've done this, I've looked at all these different things. I stay up with the current trends. I look at research, I look at statistics, and just basically show that you're not kind of sitting behind your desk sleeping all week. And you show that your job is important and you see opportunities where you can better yourself and better your students. So as we are kind of getting towards a little closer to the end, for the youth pastor that's listening, and like one of the things that I love about all the podcast resources you have through the different publishing providers, like we use Anchor, is it gives a pretty good stat breakdown of who our listeners are, where
Right.
they are, how old they are. And so I would say that a lot of our listening audience is between 18 and 30. And so while that is a pretty wide gap in age range, for the youth pastor that might be in that phase or might be a volunteer that's older, and they haven't put much time into continuing to learn, where would you recommend that they start?
Well, there's a couple of things that I'd recommend. Number one, there's a great book, and I think you can always find a great book to recommend. Um, Fulfill Your Student Ministry by Samuel Burig, I believe, is one of the best books that I've read. It's a great field guide for student ministry, just lays out a handful of things that if you're like at a loss, where do I start? What do I do? That's a great place. And so I'd wholeheartedly recommend that book. But maybe the best way to start your process of learning is to go find another youth pastor that you know, that you respect, and ask the question, hey, what are 3 podcasts that I should be listening to? What are 3 books that I need to read? And just give them an opportunity to, one, you can start that conversation about learning more and talking about things, but it's also going to give you some good feedback saying, hey, what do I need to listen to? And what do I need to read? And it doesn't necessarily even have to be about youth ministry. It could just simply be, hey, what are the 3 best books that you've read talking about your Christian life or about theology or about ministry? And then go through that list. I know that we did an episode or 2 where we talked about all these different podcasts that we were listening to and what are some good books. But I think if you could find somebody that you respect in student ministry circles, and maybe you just have to send them an email. Maybe you don't know them personally, but I think that's a great place to start. Now, the flip side is that I would also highly recommend making sure that you're growing in your own knowledge and understanding of the word. If you're not doing that, if you're not growing for your own sake and then kind of teaching out of the overflow, then there's a problem. So you need to embrace that. Start there. Read the word. Start in the book of John. Read a chapter a day. You know, we give that advice so often in ministry, but do it yourself and just see what God is going to show you, and just keep reading a chapter a day, working your way through the New Testament, and then go back to the Old Testament. But just find some ways that'll work for you. So maybe start with those 3 questions. The question of 3 podcasts or 3 books to somebody you know and respect, and then make sure that you're digging into the word yourself.
Yeah. And I would also say for the ones that might be listening to this episode and you would be, or you would consider yourself as one of the more experienced, this is your kind of call out of, hey,
Mm,
use your experience to be the mentor for the ones that need it. And
Yeah.
so if you are in a community to where you have a bunch of younger youth pastors that are in your community that use it as an opportunity to maybe go grab lunch, maybe have conversations over a cup of coffee. Allow yourself to not only use it as an opportunity for growth through you, because they're going to bring up questions that you might have not even considered for the past 10 years, but it's also an opportunity for them to have growth too. And it's just something that you do, and you can they can throw out any and all questions. They can throw out policies or procedures, or, man, my pastor at church is just blah, 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 blah. And maybe sometimes they just need a vent. They just need an ear that'll allow them to air grievances without being like, well, that was not the brightest choice that you made. But because we've all been there. I don't think there's a single youth pastor that hasn't done at least one decision to where afterwards you're like, oh no.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
because it's a learning game. It's a learning process, like you said. And so I would challenge and encourage all the ones that are out there that have a little more experience to be that mentor. And sometimes you need to seek out the younger ones, because the younger ones might not even know that they're supposed to be looking yet. Um, and so it's just a great opportunity for you not only to consider that as a resource for your own personal growth and development, because we've all said it before, you learn better when you teach.
That's right.
And so when you're training and teaching and equipping youth pastors that are younger than you are also training and equipping and teaching yourself to be a better one in the process. So definitely use that as a resource and opportunity. As we're finishing up, Dan, anything else that you have as far as this conversation, lifelong, anything we might have missed out that you want to throw in to the conversation?
Well, let me just add to the questions for the more experienced youth pastors out there. As you gather somebody, maybe you gather a couple of guys together if you have that opportunity. But maybe go eat at a Cracker Barrel or whatever's works for you. Maybe it's I guess for you Texas guys, Whataburger. But wherever you're eating, you're eating with the
Hey, man,
guys.
we have a Cracker Barrel.
Okay. And I bet you have a Whataburger. I know it's like lifeblood down there is what I hear. So 5. Okay. Well, let me throw this out. If you are meeting with those guys, ask a couple of questions. Um, Ask specifically, what is God teaching you today? Or what has he been teaching you on this past, period of time? And then ask what they're reading. One is going to challenge them. If they're not learning anything from God, if they're not reading themselves, if they're not learning in that process, then, well, it's going to start a conversation. And so it's always important, as Brent mentioned, be teaching those, and then in that process we get to teach as well. The only thing I think I would add to this process or add to this conversation is to just keep learning. It is easy, trust me, it's easy to think I've arrived. About a decade ago, 20 years into the ministry, I went to a student pastor event. It was great. I sat there and thinking to myself, okay, I've been doing this for 20 years. I should be teaching these things, and I'm not learning anything new. This is a waste of my time. And it really was just a very prideful attitude. Um, when I finally took a step back and go, wait a minute, there are things that they're learning. They're in environments and settings and cultures that I'm not. There's a lot that I can learn here. When I humbled myself in that process and realized, oh, I'm making a mistake, then I learned. And so just go into those situations ready to learn and think, okay, when I learn, I'll have that opportunity to share. I'll have the opportunity to teach and kind of share my experience. And in that process, again, that cycle kind of keeps going. But it starts with humility. So I just echo what I said at the very beginning. Let's be humble and keep learning and keep growing.
Great stuff. Great stuff. And so outside of this conversation, do you have any other resources, any other places where they can go to get help? Obviously, we've listed a lot from all the different podcasts: Student Ministry Connections, yours, Student Ministry Matters, ours, Student Ministry Conversations, Download Youth Ministry Podcast, Barna, Fuller Youth Institute, Axis. Fulfill Your Student Ministry book that you recommended that we'll put in the show notes below. And I'm also going to throw in First 2 Years of Youth Ministry, if you haven't read that book, by Doug
Yeah,
Fields,
that's a good
just
one.
because it's a fantastic book. Any other resources, any other things that you throw out there that they can go find on their own?
Boy, that is a lot to start with.
Yeah,
There are some great organizations. You mentioned many of them, and some great things that are available. So I think if you just start there, and then don't be afraid to ask the questions. If as you listen, you may be thinking, well, I've done this, this, and this, and so what else do I need to do? Don't be afraid to send an email to me or to Brent or to some of these other guys and ask those questions. Again, am I willing to be humble in the process and say, I don't know what to do? I don't know how to handle my student who is a boy who is transitioning to a girl. I mean, I just don't know what to do with that. And so you go out and you find people. One of the things that we offer, we have a Student Ministry Matters community on Facebook that is a group. It's similar to some other groups that are out there. It's a private group, but those in there will ask questions. They'll get responses from others, and so find those type of things. But I think we've shared a lot that the listeners today can go, okay, here's a starting point, and they can work from there.
yeah, definitely. Well, Dan, I definitely appreciate the conversation. Last thing I'll ask of you is, how can people connect with you on social media? How can they connect with your podcast? How can they connect with anything else you have going on? Any shameless plugs you want to throw?
There
This
we
is your
go.
time to shine, man.
Love it. In your notes that you sent to me, it said shameless plug. And I love that because, you know, I love what we're doing with Student Ministry Matters. Our goal is pretty simple. We love student ministry workers. We won't care about them. We want to invest in those that are seeking to impact the next generation for Jesus Christ. That's our heartbeat. And so we do that through a variety of ways. We do that through continuing education, through connection, and then through um, coaching. And so we offer that. So if you're ever needing a ministry coach, we're available. We do have an annual retreat. We just had that in September. It'll roll around next year in September. But you can find out information about that at studentministrymatters.com. Instagram and Facebook. You can find us at Student Ministry Matters. Our Twitter handle is a little different because we don't use it that much. But if you search for Student Ministry Matters there, you'll find it as well. And if you want to reach me, just send me an email, info@studentministrymatters.com. That comes directly to me, and I'll be able to answer any questions, direct you to anything else. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook, Pastor Dan Carson. But I just want to share with others about the ministry we got going, and just trying to reach out and help guys like you, those that are listening today that just need some encouragement, need some help, some knowledge, and some experience that we've stepped through. And so that's what I got.
Yeah, definitely. And if you're listening to this and you haven't checked out their podcast, they have tons of episodes. I'm particularly partial to one that was released like maybe 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, that I was the guest. But no,
There's your shameless
we've
plug.
had, yeah, right. We've had me and Russell both have had the opportunity to join Dan on his podcast.
Yeah.
And so you can check out our episodes as well as a bunch of other episodes that they've done over the past. Some great content on there. And their heart is our heart. We are just trying to equip youth pastors to equip the next generation of leaders. And that is basically it. We want to make you guys shine so you can be the best you can be for the students that you're serving. And we're all in this together, regardless of what our podcast name is or anything like that.
Yeah.
We are there, walking together in this, and I love the opportunity to have other hosts on our show. And then also getting the opportunity to go and do other people's shows. It's just fun. It brings together a whole different community. When you've kind of had your foot in the door for podcasting and you get to meet other podcasters that are doing the same thing, It's a lot of fun, and there's a lot of networking and community in the process. And it's a lot of excitement and a lot of energy and a lot of really cool people with cool voices like Dan Carson. But with that being said, this is the end of this episode. So if you like this episode, please do us a favor and either leave us a review, leave us a rating on any of the platforms that you listen to us on. If you think that this episode would be beneficial for someone that you know, tag them and tag us at Talk Student Men on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. We'd love to be a part of that conversation. You can also reach out to us on our website. There's a chat feature built into Facebook Messenger on our website where you can chat with us directly. And we can't wait to bring you more conversations and more content next week. And we hope you guys have a great week.